The sun had not yet fully risen over Red Hollow, but the town was already awake. A pale orange light crept across the dusty street, settling on the wooden gallows that stood like a grim monument in the center of the square. The structure had been built years ago for cattle thieves and drifters, yet it had never felt so heavy with finality as it did this morning. Every board creaked softly in the morning wind, as if the gallows itself knew what it was meant to do at dawn. Eliza May Carter stood on the platform, her wrists bound tightly with coarse rope. The fibers bit into her skin, but she did not cry out. Pain, she had learned, was something the frontier offered freely and without apology. Her dress, once modest and clean, was torn at the hem and stained with dust from the jail cell floor. A faint bruise darkened her cheek where a deputy had been less careful than he should have been. Still, her back remained straight, and her chin was lifted in quiet defiance. Below her, the townspeople gathered in uneasy clusters. Some stared openly, curiosity overpowering sympathy. Others looked away, unwilling to meet her eyes. A few whispered prayers under their breath, while others whispered rumors, each more damning than the last. "She killed him," someone muttered. The sheriff climbed the steps of the gallows, his boots heavy, his face set in practiced sternness. He did not meet Eliza's eyes. Everyone knew Harlan had financed the sheriff's election, paid his debts, and filled his pockets. Justice, in Red Hollow, was a thing that bent easily. The sheriff cleared his throat and read the sentence in a flat voice, as if he were announcing the weather. The hangman stepped forward, lifting the rope. The noose brushed against Eliza's neck, rough and cold. Her breath caught, and for a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm her. She thought of her parents' farm back east, of the children who would wait in the schoolhouse. The sound of hooves grew louder, slow and deliberate, cutting through the tense silence like a warning. Heads turned toward the far end of the main street where the dirt road dipped between two low ridges. A single rider appeared against the rising sun, his silhouette dark and unmistakable. He did not hurry. The horse beneath him moved with the steady confidence of an animal that had seen gunfire and blood and survived both. A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone whispered a name, barely louder than a breath. Silas looked up at the platform. His gaze found Eliza's face and held it. For a moment, confusion flickered in her eyes. She had never seen him before, not that she could remember. Yet there was no doubt in his expression. No hesitation. No fear. "Stop this!" The town square erupted into noise, shouts, arguments, boots scraping against dirt as men pushed closer to the gallows. Some demanded the execution continue, others argued the law, and a few simply watched in stunned silence, unsure which side to stand on. The sheriff raised his hands, trying to restore order, his authority wavering under the weight of Silas Blackwood's presence. "This changes nothing," the sheriff said at last, his voice tight. "Marriage or not, she's accused of murder. The sentence still stands." Silas did not raise his voice. He took another step forward, close enough that the shadow of the gallows fell across his shoulders. "Then you'd best hear the truth before you hang an innocent woman," he said. His eyes never left the sheriff's face. "Because Caleb Harlan wasn't killed by her hand." Eliza stared down at him, her heart racing. Innocent. The word felt fragile, like something that might shatter if spoken too loudly. She searched Silas's face for any sign of deception, but what she saw there was certainty, hard-earned and unyielding. Silas turned slightly, addressing the crowd now. "Months ago, I was shot outside this territory," he said. "Left for dead on a stretch of land with no name." His gaze flicked briefly to Eliza. "A woman found me. Called herself by another name. She didn't ask who I was or what I'd done. She treated my wounds, hid me from men who were hunting me, and saved my life." Eliza's breath caught. Memory surged, of a bleeding stranger she had sheltered in a broken-down cabin while traveling between towns, of long nights changing bandages, of a quiet man who spoke little but watched everything. She had never known his name. "I knew staying would put her in danger," Silas continued. "So I left before dawn. But I didn't leave her unprotected." He reached into his coat again and produced a small, worn ring. "We signed the contract that night. Lawful. Binding." The sheriff scoffed, though unease crept into his eyes. "Even if that's true, it doesn't clear her of murder." Silas nodded once. "No. But this does." He pulled a thick ledger from his saddlebag and tossed it onto the dirt at the sheriff's feet. The book burst open, pages stained and marked. "Harlan's accounts," Silas said. "Bribes. Land theft. And payments to his own men." His voice hardened. "He planned to sell out his partners. They found out. They killed him." A heavy silence followed. The sheriff bent down, flipping through the pages. Names appeared, names of deputies, ranch hands, even townsfolk. Sweat beaded on his brow. Behind him, two of Harlan's former enforcers shifted uneasily. One took a step back. Eliza felt the rope around her neck loosen slightly as the hangman's grip faltered. Her legs trembled, the weight of fear and hope crashing together. She clutched the edge of the platform, barely able to stand. Silas moved closer, standing directly beneath her. "I should have come sooner," he said quietly, "for her alone. But I'm here now." For the first time since dawn, tears filled Eliza's eyes, not of terror, but of relief. The gallows still loomed above them, but its power was slipping. Truth had arrived on horseback, and it refused to be silenced. The silence that followed Silas's words was thick and dangerous, like the moment before a storm breaks. The sheriff straightened slowly, the ledger still open in his hands. His eyes darted from the pages to the faces in the crowd, recognizing too many names, men who would do anything to keep those secrets buried. "This proves nothing," one of Harlan's former enforcers snarled, stepping forward. His hand drifted toward his gun. "It's a trick." Silas's gaze snapped to him, sharp and unforgiving. "You draw," Silas said evenly, "and you die." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the man drew. The square exploded into violence. The crack of a revolver shattered the morning air, followed by another and another. Silas moved before the sound of the first shot faded, his gun clearing leather in a blur. He fired once. The enforcer fell hard into the dirt, blood darkening his shirt. A second man reached for his weapon and never finished the motion. Panic swept through the crowd. Townsfolk scattered, diving behind barrels and hitching posts. Windows slammed shut. Horses screamed and pulled at their reins. Smoke bloomed thick and bitter, stinging eyes and throats. The deputies hesitated, torn between duty and survival. The sheriff shouted orders, but his voice was lost in the chaos. One deputy fired wildly and was knocked backward as a bullet struck his shoulder. Another dropped his gun and ran. Silas advanced with cold precision, each step measured, every shot final. He placed himself instinctively between the gunfire and the gallows, his body a living shield. Splinters flew as bullets tore into the wooden platform. Eliza cried out as a round tore through the post inches from her leg. "Stay down," Silas shouted without looking back. The hangman scrambled away, abandoning the rope entirely. The noose slipped from Eliza's neck and fell limp against the platform. Her knees buckled as the last thing holding her to death released its grip. Within moments, it was over. Bodies lay scattered across the square, guns smoking, the dust settling slowly back to the ground. The only sound was the wind and the distant creak of a loose sign swinging on its chain. Silas stood alone in the center of it all, revolver lowered but ready. The sheriff emerged from behind a water trough, pale and shaking. He looked at the fallen men, then at the ledger still clutched in his hands. "It's done," the sheriff said hoarsely. "Enough blood." Silas didn't argue. He holstered his gun and walked to the gallows. Without ceremony, he climbed the steps and cut the remaining rope with a single pull of his knife. Eliza collapsed forward, and Silas caught her before she hit the boards. She clung to his coat, trembling violently now that the danger had passed. He steadied her with surprising gentleness, one arm firm around her shoulders. "You're free," he said softly. The sheriff cleared his throat. "The charges are dropped," he announced to the stunned town. "Effective immediately." No one cheered. They only watched as the woman they had condemned stood alive, held by the most feared gunslinger in the West, while the gallows, empty and defeated, loomed behind them. By the time the sun reached its highest point, Red Hollow felt like a different town. The bodies had been carried away, the guns collected, and the ledger locked inside the sheriff's office, no longer a secret, but a reckoning waiting to happen. The sheriff himself looked smaller now, his authority stripped bare by the truth. He announced his resignation before sunset, citing failures of judgment, though everyone knew fear and exposure had finally caught him. Eliza sat on the steps of the old jailhouse, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her hands still trembled faintly, not from cold, but from the echo of the rope, the gunfire, the moment she had nearly ceased to exist. Silas stood nearby, speaking quietly with a rancher who had witnessed everything. When he returned, he knelt in front of her, bringing himself level with her eyes. "It's over," he said. "No court in this territory will touch your name now." Eliza studied him, really seeing him for the first time without the shadow of death looming overhead. Beneath the scars and the reputation was a man worn thin by years of violence, a man who carried his past heavily, but who had come back for her when it mattered most. "You didn't have to," she said softly. "You could have stayed gone." Silas nodded once. "I tried," he admitted. "Didn't work." The town offered her apologies, awkward, halting ones. Some averted their eyes in shame. Others thanked Silas with fearful respect, as if unsure whether gratitude might offend him. Eliza listened but did not linger. Red Hollow had nearly taken her life, it would never truly be home again. At dawn the next morning, 2 horses waited at the edge of town. Eliza wore a simple dress, clean but plain, her hair braided back against the morning wind. Silas mounted first, then reached down and helped her up, steady and sure. She settled behind him, her hands resting lightly at his waist. As they rode out, the town watched in silence. No one tried to stop them. The open land stretched wide before them, bathed in golden light. Eliza breathed deeply, tasting freedom in the cool air. For the first time since her arrest, the future did not feel like a threat. "Where will we go?" she asked. Silas glanced back, a rare softness in his eyes. "Someplace quiet," he said. "Someplace honest. We'll figure the rest out together." They rode on as the sun climbed higher, leaving behind the gallows, the lies, and the woman marked for death. In their wake remained a story Red Hollow would tell for generations: the morning a noose failed, a gunslinger chose love over legend, and a bride survived dawn.